Welcome everybody to the Better World Leaders podcast. And today, welcome the fabulous Zoe Routh. Thank you for joining us.
Tim, fabulous to be here.
So as a quick sort of intro, Zoe and I don't know each other, I'm going to say well enough yet, but we know each other a bit. I had the honor of guesting on Zoe's show last year. So it really is wonderful now to welcome you here, at an interesting, time as we've kind of reached the midpoint now in 2020, and it's been a very interesting year, but for Zoe, it's been a year, with a lot of busyness, despite everything that's going on, with a new book, the latest book that we'll talk about towards the end. But Zoe, I'll just kind of go straight into the sort of the standard opening question, and over to you just to really sort of tell us and tell everybody who's tuning in, where you came from and what brings you to be with us today.
Where I came from, out of the sludge.
Well, or actually, it's washed off quite nicely.
Thank you very much. I actually used to believe, and this is a true story. I used to believe, or maybe fantasize, that I came from the planet Pluto, and I was so convinced that I told my sister, and she was convinced of it too. So for a long time, we were waiting for the Pluto people to come and get me. So that was one of my first imaginings of where I might have come from.
From Pluto, fabulous.
Yeah, that's right. A bit of a black sheep of the family, I think I always felt. So I'm Canadian originally. I was actually born in England and then moved to Canada. I've been in Australia since '96. Yep. And my leadership journey began early at summer camp. Probably is one of my earliest initiations into running leadership. And I was a summer camp counselor and led canoe trips, and that led me to a lifetime of immersion into the wonder of the wilderness. And somewhere around 25, I worked out I love people and I love wilderness combined, and that led me to Outward Bound here in Australia. So now I work with big leaders with big hearts, big leaders. That was my wonderful little catchphrase. It just got upended. I work with big thinkers with big hearts who want to make a big difference.
Some of whom are big leaders.
They live in they have big personalities. They have big contexts, big complex issues. So that's a little taster of me, where I've been and traveled around the world and how I've ended up in this place. But yeah, I love working with people and I love the leadership context. And I think this is why you and I resonated so well. The whole idea of better leaders, better world is something that I totally resonate with. And so we're kind of like kindred spirits when we first met a few months ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I felt completely the same. It was one of those sort of, almost cosmic alignments, very easy, to fall into a dialogue, and into a train of thinking together. So just to sort of explore, the background, sort of with a little bit more specificity around, this sort of notion of making the world better. Were there any, sort of standout, sort of instances or sort of moments of calling, I like to refer to them as, potentially even before you sort of reached the foundry of leadership where you sort of recognized that you had a calling to contribute to make the world better yourself?
Absolutely. So I think I was a teenager full of angst, as many teenagers are. And one of the things I learned about in high school was about Amnesty International, like the campaign to liberate people who are suffering under human rights abuses. And I remember reading about Amnesty and I'm like, these terrible things happen around the world. And I was gutted by that whole idea. And then I was galvanized by the thought that I could be part of an organization like Amnesty to try and make things better. And I became one of the letter writing campaigns for the school. And it's interesting, how people respond to that. I remember my dad saying, and this has stuck with me. He goes, well, if you're not a left-wing bleeding heart as a younger person, then you've got no heart. And if you're not a conservative right-wing pragmatist when you're older, then you have no brain. Yeah. I thought, oh my God, Dad. Yeah. that was the start of my angst with my dad. But I think that was the starting part, discovering the capacity of the heart and care for people around the world and what they were struggling with and suffering with. And that that made me look outward a lot into the world and figuring out what we could do as people, what our responsibilities as people were to each other, and to call out injustices like that. So that's a primary one.
Sure.
That sort of kickstarted.
Yeah, yeah. And there was something that you mentioned, in one of our earlier conversations, I think, about this particular instance, at summer camp as well, that there was an occasion that really, I think, maybe sort of shifted, sort of your perspective of essentially circumstance and sort of where people are coming from as they come into your world.
Yeah. So I worked at summer camp in Ontario, Northwest Ontario. It's on the border of Ontario and the US, and this beautiful lake summer camp. And my background, I was privileged. I went to a private school. I was one of the less wealthy people at the private school, but still went to a private school. And then I ended up as summer camp counselor at the age of 17, looking after kids from all sorts of different backgrounds. And one of my very first groups of kids, they were maybe 11 or 12, so pretty young. And they were in residence for 2 weeks away from their families. And I've, for the first time, had to deal with these crazy behaviors. And one of the kids was particularly difficult. Like, she was emotional, irrational. She'd take off from the group. She would be ostracizing the other kids. Like, it was just behavior I didn't understand. I had never seen before, and tried to embrace with her. Then she'd have nightmares at night. Like, there was always something going on with her. And I thought, thank goodness, last day of summer camp. And we rode all the way into back into Winnipeg, where kids were getting picked up by their parents. And she'd been bragging all the way about, how rich her family was and stuff. And I'm like, interesting. Didn't understand or hear. Nothing that she was doing or had in her experience at summer camp reflected that. Like, she had poor clothes. She had hardly any resources. So I figured that's probably not true. And then all the other kids were being met by their parents. And there she was with her garbage bag full of her clothes. And there was no one to meet her. In fact, she had been sent a taxi by foster carers, maybe, to collect her. And so she was met by a taxi, and she bundled herself and her belongings into this taxi and was whisked away. And I remember looking around at all the other kids whose parents had come to collect them, eager to find out about their stories, and there was no one to collect her. And I remember watching this kid and the understanding at that point about who she was, what was driving her behavior, and probably the pain and challenges that she was living through broke my heart. And I think for me, that was a pivotal moment of compassion. God, I still get choked. I actually haven't talked about that story ever.
I mean, I can see it as well as we're zooming, but I can.
Yeah. I haven't talked publicly about that story. It's something that stayed with me as a picture in my brain about different people's experiences and how some people have a privileged experience and others don't. And I think that, along with the amnesty experience, really highlighted there's a lot of people who don't have what others have, and what can we do to help them live a better life? I don't know where she is now, 30, 40 years later, what kind of life she has led since. Yeah. And I've had a lot of experiences with different outdoorsy groups. When I worked at Outward Bound, similar, you have kids who are rough and problematic. And I always wonder, like, what happens to them next? Are they able to take their experience and turn it around and create something new and different? Or are they going to repeat patterns? So I became extremely interested in how we look after ourselves as leaders and as families and as communities, and how as individuals we can take control of our experience. And underneath that, I think, is you need to have the inner resources and understanding of how you work as a human before you can do that kind of work. And not everybody gets to that point where they're able to do that. So I always have this wish for the people that I've come across that they can access that at some point. And the great sense of compassion and care for others sort of bloomed in that moment with that one little girl who went home to a family that didn't care or couldn't care for her.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, thank you. I mean, first of all, thank you, for talking about that here. Thank you for sharing. I think most people who look at the world the way that you and I do, I think would have a moment like that, at least one, or perhaps a cascade of them before it kind of gets to the slap in the chops moment. I know I've had my fair share. And I mean, it's interesting. I was having a conversation earlier in the year with the chairman of a charity who, was at pains in our conversation to sort of say how fortunate and privileged he feels he was in his life and his career. And when we were talking, he was in isolation in his, sort of apartment in Singapore, but was really, sort of emphasizing, without diminishing the impact of, the global pandemic crisis on everybody. And at that point in time, it was really only just kind of about to get bad in Singapore. They were just starting to sort of sense that they hadn't quite got control of it as well as they thought they had. But he was essentially saying, you've got to appreciate that, being in lockdown, in a very, sort of comfortable, sort of westernized city, feels like a great inconvenience and a real struggle. But essentially, there's a lot of people in the world who would look at this like a holiday from the life that they lead every day. And I think that, that's a really, really telling and poignant, reflection at this point in time, more so than ever. I think, as many questions are now being asked about, what is the world going to be like, and how are we going to think, and what are we going to do? And for the likes of you and I, who work with leaders, how is leadership now different? Sort of in the the sort of the, well, we're still in 2020, but the post 2020 world, as opposed to the pre 2020 world. So do you think that there's a chance that, sort of having had a really, kind of hopefully once in a generation event like the COVID-19 pandemic, that more people are going to have access to experiences and stories like that one that you've just shared? And if so, how will it help them leverage, that experience into their leadership?
I'm not sure about whether people are going to have experiences like that will catalyze their reflection and then their action. This is what I have been thinking about in terms of how the world is going to shift. And I've been paying attention a little bit to the signs that new values are being expressed or followed. And I was having a great conversation with Joe Jackman, who's the author of the Reinventionist Mindset, fabulous book. And I asked him that same question, and he said, and I've been thinking about what he said, the big shift is going to be from a value-based economy to a values-based economy. And the meaning behind that is, value-based economy is, I have a thing, I give this thing to you, or the service to you, and you pay me money. There's the transactional thing. Values-based economy is about thinking very specifically about our individual actions, whether it's spending money or whether it's reaching out to someone, and the idea and awareness that individual action has a collective repercussion or a cumulative effect. And I think people are becoming way more aware of how their individual actions can have a big impact. And I think that's what's going to come to the fore for people, not necessarily that they're going to observe other people's pain and be transformed by that. Because to be honest, social media has given us huge insights into people's pain around the world. But because it's anonymous and not personal, we almost get anesthetized. Is that the right word?
Anesthetized, yeah.
Numbed. We get numb to it.
Perfect.
And yet I think now that it makes a big difference, like with our $5, we can choose to go to our local coffee shop and spend that coffee and support that business owner and the families that they support. Or we can choose not to spend it. We can choose to keep paying our service providers, like our cleaners. We can still have our cleaners come in because we have enough resources to do that. And that is a vote to keep them and their families going. And I think that kind of awareness is going to be a significant change, and thinking about how we live our lives and how we consciously invest our time, money, and energy. And I think that's going to be a pivotal change. I think those who are sensitive to others will have more and more experiences of being sensitive to others, and they'll develop compassion. I think the stories about gratitude and the stories about support of each other, that kind of narrative, I think will spark inspiration around the traps. There's a lot of conversations I'm having with leaders about community and interaction and support, and them initiating it or participating in it and the difference that that's making. A lot of these things we knew about before, but didn't have to engage in it. And now that we are having to engage it and experiencing viscerally the impact of that, I think that is going to help shift our actions and then create different systems in the world. So this is what I am looking forward to, and I'm excited to participate in, is some of the redesigning of our businesses, of our business systems and engagement. I mean, some things are going to fall off the truck and not get back on, and some things are going to be massively transformed. The way that I think about COVID-19 experience is it's a giant cocooning. I think the idea of hibernation is the wrong metaphor. I think the idea of just putting your head down and sleeping through it is the wrong action, or just living off the fat of whatever you have. And the idea of spinning a cocoon around ourselves and dissolving what we have with a little bit of seeds of what was and what could be, and creating something new is definitely what I'm experimenting with, and what is giving me hope and courage. I think what we'll do is we'll take the best of who we are into the future and build something from there. Now, that's one vision. The other vision is that we default into us versus them, that we become even more parochial and more contained and more isolated as a result of this. That's myopic and dystopian view of the world. I actually don't think that that's going to happen, because the only way we're going to get through this as a species is to collaborate. And we've got great examples right now of nations collaborating to find solutions to the virus, and people swapping notes in different cities about what are you doing here, what are you doing there. So there's huge cross-cultural collaborations happening to help end the pandemic or get through the pandemic. And I think this is setting up what we, as you and I have long aspired to see in the world, is that this cross-cultural collaboration and integration of a healthy society globally. We've got some practical examples of that. Hey, it can work. And that's what we were missing before. Otherwise, it just sounded like a utopian, big-hearted view. Yeah. Now we can see that it's not only possible, but that it's essential.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much in there. We could talk for hours or have our own, sort of series of discussions just based on that response there. So thank you. And that was an amazing compaction of so many incredibly valid points. I think there's a few that I'm just going to kind of tease out initially. And then I'm actually going to ask another question and then probably kind of circle back again. And there's a few things circling in my mind, just referencing some of the sort of academic and empirical responses to those exact points around values-based systems that I'm just recalling from earlier in the year. But I think the key thing and the operative thing in everything that you just said, for me, what I took out of it was that, and why I love the cocoon analogy so much, is that, the whole point of a cocoon is that what comes out of it is different from what went in. And it is a transformative process, and it is a sort of a pause, but it is a pause to basically protect a phase of growth during which the being is intensely vulnerable. If a caterpillar just kind of mooched about and day on day it drops a leg and sort of like starts to build a stubby wing, ain't going to get too far. But if you can, again, to use your term, kind of take, sort of the seeds and the sustenance that you sort of could gather from the world around you as you are, and kind of, snuggle down into that in your, sort of fluffy cocoon or Manhattan apartment or Canberra and Homestead or wherever you may be, what then emerges whenever the time is right, is something that has been through a transformative process and is now got a different journey ahead of it. And I think if the world can cocoon now and then transform and come out as something, more like a butterfly, than a really kind of angry moth, to anthropomorphize insects for a moment, and be, sort of pollinating and creating as well as beautiful, rather than just consuming and, sort of monotone as we just go on and on and on relentlessly. I think you and I both, sort of are hoping for the same outcome. So thank you for bearing with me for that. So the question I'm going to ask you, just to kind of, take us, sort of into a bit of a mutual comparison. We're both migrants to Australia. You've been here 10 years longer than me. I arrived in 2006. But I'm curious just about your sort of personal experience, during the sort of the most intense phase, sort of COVID. Did you find that you had more or less connection to people, sort of maybe friends and family, sort of overseas, and colleagues and peers and business, relations further away? Did that diminish or did that increase during the isolation period?
All the relationships increase connection.
Yeah, 100%.
Which is amazing, really. So, for example, I got a call from one of my running club friends, because we can't meet as a big collective, and say, "Hey, you want to go out for a run together?" I'm like, "Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, sure."
Yeah.
And that sense of individual connection was really important. Hopped online the other day with my family, which is far-flung. So I've got a sister and her family in New Jersey, parents in Montreal, a brother in northern Alberta, and me in Australia. And we're all on the same Facebook call video. And that was wonderful. We haven't been together like that all of us together in the same virtual room for 5 or 6 years. So those are examples. And then even colleagues in my professional community, we're now meeting up once a week and finding huge value in that. It doesn't always have to be productive in terms of let's talk about business. In fact, we don't talk about business. It's like, hey, how are you doing? Oh, where are you today? Like show us your lounge room office or wherever it is, or just shooting the breeze. And that sense of connection absolutely strengthened across all of my communities. In fact, finding new communities that I value even more too. So yeah, that's been really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just reciprocate, and so my experience has been the same. I've had friends from all over the world and from different junctures in my life, sort of instigate contact or respond to a simple, "Hey, how you going?" with a much more evocative and, sort of meaningful response. My oldest friend, who I met in 1985, who's now on the front lines as a nurse in the NHS in the UK, we speak most of the time annually, right? We've been speaking far more often and with a lot more, I think, almost sincerity. I mean, not to say that, you can't have what's the weather like conversation insincerely, but it's just, it's not as meaningful. And then I've had business connections who kind of drifted away because they've moved, to New York from Sydney, pick up the phone and say, because you're experiencing the same thing as me, I'd actually really be interested in your advice. So I think in a way, because this thing has been so broad spread, and because as much as the experience obviously varies individually, but it is more consistent than a lot of other kind of catastrophic events previously, I think the shared, sort of collective experience is a lot more aligned. And again, to your beautiful analogy from summer camp, that story told through the most powerful Instagram video doesn't poke people in the eye the same way as it does when you're standing on that street corner looking at that girl get into that cab with her garbage bag full of belongings, because it can't. It's impossible. Our sensory perception can't engage with it the same way. But far more people are having a real experience with this thing themselves, and they are sharing what is it like for you? Oh, that's the same for me. And oh, was it like that for you? I had something very, very comparable to that. So this is kind of the thing that gives me hope that as an event, this will be a catalyst for a positive values-based transformation in a way that, the dot-com bust wasn't, and the GFC wasn't, or the Asia Pacific tsunami wasn't, because it didn't impact at a global level in the same way and with the same meaning, and to an extent with the same emotional impact that this has. So yeah, I mean, final thing I'll share, like you have a large extended family. We've had calls connecting family members who have not had a shared experience, virtual or otherwise, for 5 or 6 years. You know, the couple living in Copenhagen, my brother lives in Edinburgh, you know, sort of friends in London, Sydney, Melbourne, America, all on a Zoom call, and no, it is not the same. And yes, the bandwidth is a bit clunky, and you know, people hang and kind of get caught just as they're about to put some food in their mouth, and it looks like a Charlie Chaplin movie. But it is a real interaction, and is a shared experience of a common calamity that certainly has brought us as a family unit together. And I know that that's the same in business and in organizations around the world. So yeah, I think that gives us some hope. And a couple of things I was going to reflect on. I remember reading something by Yuval Noah Harari, you know, sort of when things were really kind of getting bad in the UK, you know, and he's based in Oxford. And he was talking very much about a societal cultural shift. And that, you know, referencing a lot of his research, that really is kind of what was needed in order for us to sort of transgress and move beyond, you know, sort of some of what he sees as inhibiting, you know, sort of societal norms. And there was something, and if she ever hears this, I apologize in advance. There's a Dutch thought leader called Lee Erdekruit, I think. I used to have a Dutch girlfriend, so my Dutch is horrible, but not as bad as some people's. And yeah, she was talking about a shift towards a values-based system after the quarantine of consumption. That was the term that really sort of stood out, you know, to me. That, yeah, I think that's the kind of the short, sharp shock. We can't just go and shop right now. You know, we can't just go and hang out and sort of distract ourselves with the beautiful meal or the movie or the whatever. Like, we kind of have to just be together now. And maybe that's what it takes to kind of ground people. And I know I'm going to bring it back to you. It's one of your lines that I think, if I get it right, centered leaders are essentially better leaders. I mean, over to you to kind of, you know, articulate that in a far more better way, but maybe this is a grounding moment as much as it's a catastrophic one.
Absolutely. So that's the tagline from my first book, Composure. Center leaders make the biggest impact.
No, I'd seen it somewhere.
Yeah. And the grounding piece is really important. I think being centered through this is such a gift, because the whole idea of being centered to be a wise and compassionate leader is that you have the best of your intellect, which is the wisdom piece, and the best of the heart, which is the compassion piece. And in the middle, you are peaceful. And this is not my definition, but Cindy Wigglesworth, who defines the capacity of spiritual intelligence as that, is to be both wise and compassionate, expressing inner and outer peace regardless of the circumstances. And I think, yeah, that's kind of what we need right now, is that the circumstances are pretty nuts. Yeah. And to reach for inner peace and to show up peaceful on the outside and be able to act and respond with wisdom and compassion is exactly what the world needs for better leadership. And that's a process. It's a practice to get to that point. I don't think you just wake up one day and like, I'm centered. We need to work on it.
I finally got there. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know there was a question that I asked you offline, you know, around sort of the significance of the role of leaders in making the world better, you know, and you know, the response that you gave was, you know, was very much along those lines. That I'll just read it, if I may. You know, your response was, leaders making the world better, we're all in this together. And if we each did something to improve the lives of each other, the world would be uplifted. Leaders shine a light and uplift others. No leadership, no light.
Oh my God, that makes me want to weep. That was obviously channeled.
Would you care to share any more on that, Zoe, or is that, have we got it right there?
No, I think that's my philosophy. It's true. Leadership is such a microcosm, operates on both micro and macro. And one of the things we were also discussing is this idea of perspective, like how can we get leaders to become better world leaders? And the idea of perspective is critical to that. And I think when we can do the micro perspective of, if I can help someone around me, then the whole world is uplifted. It's that whole idea of interconnection that is really important. And Perspective for better world leaders is being able to zoom out and see the biggest perspective possible. We see the earth within its context of the universe. And at some point that feels, so what? What can I do about it? What is meaningful about that? And it's in some of the research I was doing for my latest book, People Stuff, about astronauts and their experiences with this idea of perspective is quite powerful. And a lot of them, when they go into space and they look back down at the planet and they see this little blue dot hanging in this vast darkness, they have these metaphysical experiences, a transcendent kind of experience where they realize how fragile and vulnerable the planet is, and that there are no borders and boundaries there. It's all this one little entity, this common sea of life, of humanity, and of living things on this tiny little thing, which is insulated by a small layer of atmosphere. So fragile. It's been described by some as the orbital perspective. I'm thinking of the astronaut's name now, Ron Garan. He talked about this. He's written a book on it, the orbital perspective. So when you're in orbit looking at the planet, and he talks about when he landed on one of his excursions from space back onto the planet in Kazakhstan, I think it was. And through the lens of his landing craft, he was face down level with the earth, and he saw this blade of grass, and he remembers saying to himself, I am home. And Kazakhstan, he's American, it's not his nation's home, but the idea of home was the entire planet. And I think this is absolutely essential for better world leaders, is that we zoom out and we have the sense that this planet and all of the beings on it are our home and our community. And it really is a global centrist view of the world. And I think it's only by thinking of ourselves as responsible to and for the planet and the people and its people that we can start to make different kinds of decisions. So that's the zooming out perspective. And the zooming in perspective is, okay, and part of me feels really powerless when I think, who am I in the bigger context of a globe? And to zoom in and go, me and you, what can I do for you? How can I help you? You know, and when we uplift another, all people are uplifted. So perspective is really essential with all of that. And then the balancing of it, so zooming out, zooming in is perspective taking. The balancing of it is the wisdom and compassion piece. So when we can do that zoom in, zoom out, we need to act with wisdom. We need to make the best possible decision given what we know at the time. And we need to do it with compassion, which is the desire to alleviate suffering if we can, to see suffering and to alleviate it if we can. If we balance zooming out, zooming in with wisdom and compassion, then we have an excellent recipe for better leadership in the global community, as well as the personal communities around us.
No, I think that's, again, thank you and congratulations. And I'll just, sort of spend the next couple of weeks just absorbing the transcript so that I can fully internalize, that superb message. But I think again, sort of not just sort of fixating on this very prominent defining moment, but I think we were starting to see a distinct motion towards that, the recognition that we need this elevated perspective. We were starting to see, corporate leaders, talking about, the need to have a responsibility greater than to the shareholders' next quarterly dividend. I mean, that's just the most sort of superficial example, but I felt like the world was beginning to at least make a slight sort of adjustment, if not turn. And again, my great hope is that, this calamity will be the catalyst to do exactly what you've just described, for leaders collectively to look at each other, regardless of, origin, ethnicity, self-interest, whatever, and see the oneness of leadership, and that the purpose of that oneness is to take this elevated perspective and then figure out at the most local level, where everyone has power in of themselves, what can we do to keep progressively moving forward to make the world better. I think that's sort of my my receipt and response of your far better articulated message. So you mentioned perspective there, and I know that there's a few other things that that you'd have to say were I to ask you, what are some specific, sort of, again, motions toward or actionable steps that a leader that's listening to this could take to themselves progress towards being a better world leader? What can people do?
So yeah, perspective taking is absolutely a core essential skill, and being able to zoom in, zoom out. And in the zooming out phase is to hone systems thinking skills. So that's the ability to map integrated systems in an organization, in an economic system, political system, and be able to see the intersections and lever points of that is essential. And the understanding of evolution, how things evolve and grow and develop and transform, those are kind of like core leadership skills, thinking skills. I guess one of the other ones from an individual perspective is decide on the role that you want to play. And one of the ways that I like to think about doing this is to choose an archetype, because archetypes create architecture for action. And archetypes have shown up in all civilizations around the world in the form of different narratives. So Joseph Campbell's work, A Hero with a Thousand Faces, captures a lot of that. So he traced all these different fables and stories from different cultures and mapped out a common pattern of the hero's journey. Interesting, though, that one of his students mapped out a different journey for the heroine. And there's actually a different journey for the heroine. So female architect of the female heroine journey is quite different. It's about the integration of self and empowerment and honoring of the feminine, whereas the male hero's journey is about overcoming the external world and rising to power and then experiencing humility. So it's two very different paradigms, and they still exist for us. So archetypes are roles that we recognize as generic, if you like. So we have archetypes like the mother or the father, the king or the queen, the sage, the pioneer, the pirate. Those are all types of archetypes. As soon as we say pirate, say, for example, we have this whole web of imagery and patterns of behavior that we can identify with. So if we were going to embrace the pirate, say, for example, as an archetype, we know that be a bit swashbuckling, a little bit daring, a bit renegade, a bit of screw you, a bit of I'm going to look after myself kind of thing, and just, charge ahead and rule the seas according to my own laws. I'm not suggesting we choose that archetype, by the way, for this current context. Not for global transformation anyway, maybe for different parts of your life, but not for this one. So I think choosing an archetype that can help, that you can embody and help make you make better decisions given the context that you're within is an essential skill. In People Stuff, I've got 5 core archetypes that I think are useful for business leaders at this time. The central one is the elder, and we've talked a little bit about elements of the elder. So that's being able to act with wisdom and compassion with inner and outer peace. That is the archetype of the elder, somebody who's been through a lot, who's stoic, and can respond to different situations with a lifetime of experiences and contextualizing, can have the bigger picture perspective as well as the micro picture. Embodying the elder, no matter what our age is, it's not an age thing. It's more about how much perspective and experience can you ground in you and be able to serve in the moment. I think the elder is a really useful archetype that we should carry with us at all times. And then there's 4 others that we could potentially choose depending on what we're facing at the time. And one of them is the warrior. I think the energy of courage that exists in the warrior is something that we can embody at particular times. Not the warrior that goes out to kill and subdue other nations. That is not the warrior that I'm looking for. The warrior who fights to uphold justice. The warrior that fights to uphold human rights. The warrior that fights for creating a better world. That's the warrior that we want to embody. And I think there'll be a time for that coming soon, where we need to activate that. We've got the guardian archetype as well. And I think as we move through this period of time, the year of 2020, the guardian serves a tension of 2 roles. One is to protect what's good about our experience. So just like the chrysalis of a caterpillar reserves within it the template of its being as well as the future possibility. The guardian also does that. The guardian is about, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater in this transformation that we're going through. And so they hold the tension of protecting core essentials like our values, as well as building something new for the future. So the guardian plays an important role, and they may show up in your team meetings as the devil's advocate. There's somebody who challenges things, and they may feel like the naysayer, but they're providing an important role. And another one is the diplomat. So how do we stay centered in difficult discussions and decision-making and advocate for the best solution for all parties? And the last one is the pioneer, which is the daring, audacious creator. Let's go into a new future and create something new together. So there's elements of each of those archetypes that I think are going to be useful for leaders to activate at different times, and always with the elder as the centering piece. So the way that we do that is we can get a picture of one of those archetypes. We can get an amulet or a symbol of some sort to anchor us to that. And so that we get reminded of the qualities, the narrative of that particular archetype, so that it becomes us. And so we show up as an elder, or we show up as the diplomat, or we show up as the warrior as needed. And we use the energy, the spirit of it. And it filters through our voice and our communication and our connection with others in a more seamless way. So it's about performance as well as connection. So those would be some pragmatic steps I would take to help move us into better world leadership.
No, that's beautiful. I think, for me, I think what I receive in that is essentially there's some great, sort of examples of, a framework that you can, kind of intentionally adopt that defines how you're going to show up as a leader.
That's right.
And I'm going to show up as the guardian because right now we need to essentially sort of be most beholden to what is most dear and most integral to us, those values, our why, our purpose, or today, or for this period of time, it's warrior mode. I'm going to get my shield and my insert appropriate sort of Marvel or DC sort of, lasso of truth, or sort of whatever it's going to be, because it is time to step into the arena, and armor is recommended, as well as vulnerability before courage, of course. So I'm not going to sort of accentuate the point. You've depicted those those archetypes so well, but I think again it is such an appropriate and necessary, bordering on mandatory moment to as a leader really just pause just for a second and say, okay, which of those archetypes that Zoe has described is going to best enable me to contribute, to elevate my perspective, and to to move forward in alignment with the global requirement for leadership. And I think also I would suggest that share your thoughts, please. People should be prepared to delegate one of those sort of archetypes within their team or their peer group, and potentially they should be prepared to shift between archetypes, not sort of on an hourly basis, but you can't just be a warrior. You need to be able to be adaptable, I would say.
Oh, absolutely. These are not like you stay static. It's you pick them up and play with them lightly. And they serve a purpose that's contextual and a point in time or a period of time. And absolutely, you can get different team members to play these different archetypes for a particular context. It's similar to Edward de Bono's work in terms of 6 thinking hats. If you're trying to problem solve, you're taking different perspectives around that, except that you're channeling it in a more embodied way than the hats. The other thing I would also want to highlight for people is that each of the archetypes has a shadow, and the better world leaders need to be very self-aware, because each of these archetypes has a hook that can drag us into the negative aspect of that particular archetype, and we need to be mindful of where we might be slipping. So the warrior, as an example, the warrior can get hooked by power. So the relationship to power can be a really crippling thing. And the desire to win can transform into desire to dominate. And this can turn us from a warrior into a bully. And there's a very fine line where we slip from one to the other, and we may not perceive that it's happened. In fact, a lot of bullies perceive themselves as warriors fighting the good fight, but what they're in fact doing is embodying the bully. And I guess each of them has a shadow, and the general switch is going from focusing on others to focusing on self. And that switch of perspective is the one that can amplify or bring to the fore the shadow. And I think it's always important to be mindful of where are we sitting? Where's our primary concern? Is it about self, or is it about others and collective? So if we stay focused on others and collective, we'll keep amplifying the positive side of the archetypes and avoiding the shadow version. Like, for example, the shadow version of the elder is the tyrant. Mm. And it's quite a big shift, right? To go from, you may think you were being the wisest, compassionate person in the world, but as soon as you start to spin and think about your own elevation and your own reputation, you've lost the focus on others, and you can become a tyrant, thinking that you become blinkered in your perspective, thinking, I'm right, I'm wise, I know what I'm doing, this is the way we need to do it. And that's when the tyrant evolves, and we become dictators. So I think that's something also to be mindful of. We can slip. It can be slippery.
So be malleable, be adaptive, but be cautious and self-aware as you manage and migrate between the archetypes. Yeah.
Advanced leadership is about the ability, again, from a perspective point of view, is to be looking at yourself from an outsider's perspective. It's like, what's going on in my head, and to observe that, observe your thinking processes and observe your emotional processes. And that ability to distance ourselves from our internal world, that with an observer point of view, is the hallmark of advanced leadership and of advanced emotional intelligence also. And it's only when we can do that can we start to really understand others and really be able to connect with others. And it becomes even more important the more mature and experienced we are as leaders, is the ability to self-check, because typically we will get a lot more opportunities for authority, which can be the tipping point for the power degrading. A great book on that, it's called The Power Paradox. It's a fabulous read on this whole trap of power.
Okay, and who's that by?
I can't remember. Sorry.
I'm sure. The book title's there. Sure. No, good on you. And sorry, I could have intuited that response, and I could have just Googled it and put it in the notes. Although, I use this frequently enough. My favorite response from one of my favorite leaders, came in an interview with the Dalai Lama when, the interviewer asked him, what do people say? What do you say to people when they say, why we're here? Or, what is my purpose? Or what's the meaning of life? And he said, I always say the same thing. It's a very, very, sort of significant, deeply resonating thing. Do you want me to tell you what it is? And the interviewer goes, oh, yes, please. Oh, would you share that with us? He said, right. Are you ready? Are you recording? I say this. I don't know, but I'm sure you'll find out one day. It's something to that effect. And it's cool to say we don't have all the answers and we don't know, and we can find out the answer to that book. And Tim can do that very, very quickly. But the power paradox. Thank you. And I'm just going to sort of perhaps slightly awkwardly take this segue here to share with us another great book, your book, which is sort of out in the world sort of very, very soon. People stuff. Is there anything in particular that you'd like to share with us now about what's contained within that beautiful vessel?
Well, thanks very much, first of all, for the halo effect of mentioning Dalai Lama and then my book. So I'm like, awesome.
That was an intentional psychological nudge, I assure you.
The question is, what's my book about? Is that the question? Okay, so fundamentally, it's about the power of perspective, how we see ourselves, others, and the world around us. And my deliberate intention for this book is to help people move into taking on an eldership type of role, so that we can start to understand the patterns of our own behavior, how they understand the patterns of the four devils of people stuff, and how people show up in the not so great version of themselves, and how we can respond to that. And then the bigger picture of who is us is largely what we've been talking about on this podcast, the interconnectivity of everything, the orbital perspective, how we can show up and operate as a leader within that context. So it's an advanced handbook for leadership. This is not a beginner's guide, that's for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's people stuff, you, them, us, an advanced handbook for leadership. And that's fundamentally what it's about.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, I, for one, will be very much looking forward to getting through it and no doubt learning more than a thing or two. So thank you for creating that and bringing that into the world. I'm going to just sort of ask you, one of the sort of mandatory sort of end of podcast questions as we move to the wrap up stage. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
You can find me at my website, zoerouth.com, ZOEROUTH.com. And on LinkedIn, I spend quite a bit of time on LinkedIn. That's an easy place to connect with me. I do respond to all of the messages I get to.
Perfect. And I for one will say, I very much enjoy, particularly our interactions on LinkedIn in the virtual world, but really everything you put up there. Your own podcast, if anybody hasn't, check that out as well. Do listen to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. I'll advocate that for you, and check Zoe out at the website and LinkedIn as well. Zoe, that's about all we've got time for today. But again, thank you for dispensing such an enormous amount of really sort of quality, actionable knowledge and insight, as well as a really sort of splendid perspective on the world and what better world leaders and the world at large need right now. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
You'll find audio and video recordings for this episode, as well as links and related resources mentioned today in the podcast area of 4iLeadership.com/insights. This is the Better World Leaders podcast, brought to you by 4i Leadership.